Hi, everybody. Welcome to That Early Childhood Nerd. I'm Heather Burnt Santee, and here also is Lisa Murphy.
Hello, nice to see you.
Yay, nice to see you. I'm keenly aware of when people watch this, the video version of this one, they're going to see my dead sleepy eyes and be like, "What the hell is wrong with you?"
You could do that, little guy.
I'm just sleepy. I'll just cover my eyes.
That little black band like we used to say.
Yeah, I need sunglasses, I guess. Okay, so Lisa and I are going to talk about some photos that I found on social media that were being shared of infants, and the caption for the post was like, "Learning begins in the infant room," or "Learning begins with babies," or something like that. And then it was like, it looked like babies who could sit on their own, but babies,
yeah,
in their little wooden child care supply catalog chairs at the little wooden table, and one was in a high chair, maybe.
Yeah, one was in a high chair. The rest were in that bucket table.
The bucket table, that's what it was. Yes, the bucket table. And
bucket they had babies.
Yeah, so it was like a group activity for babies, and it was construction paper. Each child had their own construction paper, and they were either gluing numbers or matching.
It was a caterpillar. It was a caterpillar image
with numbers on the circles to make up the caterpillar body.
Yeah, it burnt itself in my brain.
I thought it was in mine too, but clearly now that I'm talking about it, it wasn't. Anyway, it was obviously intended to be sort of promotional for the math learning that happens even with babies at this program. So I'm going to go ahead and do a quote because that's what we do. We've only ever done 2 episodes without a quote.
Was I involved in those 2?
I don't. One was a text from you instead of a quote. I know.
That's still a quote.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. So here, this is from Learning Together with Young Children by Margie Carter and Deb Curtis. And they say, let me say this first, that you're going to use the phrase teaching strategies. In this context, it's a generic, not referring to the brand teaching strategies. So this is just a generic idea of strategies that we might use. So here's what they say. We believe that teaching strategies should flow from a consciously defined belief system, not a set of regulations, a series of activity books, or a bag of tricks. Your curriculum and teaching behaviors reflect a set of assumptions about your view of children and your role as a teacher. So when I read this, I was thinking, in terms of those photos of those babies, I suppose that the adults who planned that could say, this is from my belief system. I believe that learning starts with babies and it's never too early. And, so much brain development's happening now. We've got to do all these academic things with them. But what they were really doing is sort of that teacher bag of tricks that they're referring to here, and the view that infants are empty and I am
fill them up.
I have to fill them up, and my role as a teacher is to fix, even at this very early age, this math deficit and get them ready for this thing that I think might be happening, in 5 years when they go to school. Although, we know too that that kind of skill and drill math stuff is not what gets them most ready for school.
Exactly.
So anyway, that was so interesting to me when I saw the picture. I mean, if I want to be harsh, it was disrespectful to babies, but also
that's kind of where I was locked and loaded. And I think I've become, especially with social media, to some degree, such a cynic that I just assume everything's like a spoof. Like I like to err on the side that it's like an onion, the Onion post, and that it's all tongue in cheek, and they're being comical about it, and then you realize that it's not, and I think that's just what allows me to sleep at night without crying myself to sleep. Is, oh my God, they are doing this on purpose. And to some degree, probably even doing it with intention. Like, I think if I even asked my 3 questions, they would honestly have a response for it, that goes beyond like, oh, it's so cute. Like, oh, this
Yeah.
is math. And like, they're speaking from a place that they feel is informing their work. And it's just misguided, right? The
Yeah.
intention is there, but when you, and I love how you frequently will bring it back to the developmental piece, right? And when we bring it back to what we know about how infants are learning and what infants need in order to be on a positive developmental trajectory, it's not that.
Right.
And, unless you're kind of at a place where you're open for that kind of feedback, that can be really tricky to get somebody to change lanes, so to speak. Right. And, I'm not saying that what you've been doing is bad. I'm saying that it's a very, very kind of crude initial baseline. And now it's time to start adding to your practice.
Yeah, I mean, this goes to what we often talk about, that before you know better, this is what we do. By the time I worked with infants, I had
you knew better.
I knew better, but my first experiences were really with 2-year-olds, and I absolutely did things that looked like school until I found something to read that explained that 2-year-olds don't necessarily need or learn from those kinds of things. So I know that it does probably come from a place of my job is to teach, and so caterpillars are fun, so this will be a fun way of teaching math, and for me math is numbers, and being able to recognize numbers. So there is some learning that needs to happen to before you can even move out of that, I guess is what I'm saying. So yeah, I know I'm being harsh and probably will be again, because I just see too much of this from people who should know better, I guess. So I want to make that distinction. There are those folks who just haven't been presented with a different idea, or haven't had the opportunity, or no one has taught them or introduced them or showed them.
At least you hope that, right? You give them the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
And it's not like that they do know better and they're like, well, screw you. I like to do caterpillars with my babies.
Exactly. Yeah. Or this is what the parents want. This is what parents want. They want to see learning.
I still think it always comes back to the values. So regardless, what do you believe in? And that's that Tom Bedard quote that I've been just tossing around for like 2 years now. But until we've identified what we believe in, it's you can't reflect on your practice, right? So and when you've got potentially 4 people working in the room together with all the babies, and you might have 4 different set of values, and you have all those interpersonal dynamics and the invisible hierarchy and the culture of the school. I mean, there's so many variables that come into play, that unless the owner / director or management team has a really crystal clear vision on what you and I would call best practice, you're going to have 15 different, roads being driven. And unfortunately, I don't know. And you what did you say? Harsh was your word. Like I can understand that kind of activity, quote unquote, in maybe toddler and preschool, pre-K, but I don't know, man, there's just something about, weren't the babies always supposed to be exempt from, all of that nonsense?
Not anymore. I guess it's 2 extremes. Babies can't do anything, or babies are ready for preschool
for algebra, right? Yeah. Where's that middle ground? And I don't know. I mean, I just see those infant years as being so crucial. That, if we're going to start slipping and sliding and deviating from best practice, I don't know. And I'm probably going to regret saying this, but I'd rather see that happen in pre-K, maybe after a rock solid attachment-based, relationship-based early childhood or infant experience.
Well,
and just what we all know about birth to 3 is just so crucial, relationship and connection and attachment wise. I just see those kinds of external things as missed opportunities.
Yes. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. If we go back to the good intention, that's great, but you're I don't know how to say this that doesn't sound like the grouchy person that I am in this moment, but there just is, it could be so much bigger and better and even more satisfying as a teacher if we were better in our practice, in our field, at connecting theory to what we're actually doing, and feeling like, well, I mean, and you have to know the theory first, but even our instincts, I think, with babies are more towards caring. Yes. Yeah. But we push it down, and we feel like if I'm a teacher, it has to be more than just this caring. And in my mind, teaching looks like everybody doing the same thing at the same time. And there has to be either a number or a letter involved, and then I'm a teacher.
Yeah.
And it's sad for the babies and for the teachers, I think.
Yeah, I think the thing that's coming up for me too, listening to you talk, is not only the caring piece, right? That yet another false dichotomy, that it's either teaching or caring, or you know, and ne'er the two shall cross. And we know that that's not true, but also that's feeling like, especially in an infant room, it comes up a lot in the mixed age workshop, which I'm actually doing today online. So I'm like kind of thinking of that, is through the pandemic, a lot of people were sharing that the programs were considering going to mixed ages just because of the pandemic, right? And keeping siblings together in cohorts and smaller groups and blah, 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 blah. And one of the things that people found the strength and courage to say was that they felt that, no, not felt, they did not realize that they had associated a mixed age mindset with babysitting. And there was a feeling that by going to a mixed age setting, I was actually, you know, taking a hit and going down a rung in that ladder of somehow being demoted within a profession that already isn't seen as valuable.
Right.
And now you're going to add this other layer to it. And I think sometimes, especially in infants, especially an infant program where it is like 6 weeks to maybe, you know, a year and a half together, you know, it is kind of an organic mixed age setting, that perhaps people just don't feel like the caring piece is enough, right? It has to be something more in order to be perceived as value. And then we find ourselves often maybe like second guessing what we know we need to be doing in order to appease somebody who has no idea what the hell is going on or what best practice looks like. And I just see this horrific, vicious cycle of people who potentially know better, just on this fast track treadmill of keeping other people happy and meeting their perceived expectations that are misguided in the first place, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think sometimes the pressure of the expectation, or what other people think or expect from us, is it's a circle. Like those people might not even really be expecting that of us, but they think that's what we want to focus on. So that's what they do. And then we think that's what they want to focus on. And we just go around and around and around, when in reality, some of that pressure might not even really be there. Some of those expectations might not really even be there. Yeah.
Pressures.
Yeah.
Not even real.
And I think, too, if we want to talk specifically about this being an intended math activity, there's some stuff to unpack there too, because, so I think it was 2015, I wrote an article for Exchange about teachers' math anxiety, like from their own lives coming in and interfering with doing appropriate math, or intentional math at all with young children. And so we know that a lot of women don't feel like math was very welcoming to them in their own school experiences.
Math baggage, ranging through the years. Sidebar, I've had people say they were straight up told by teachers, you don't need to know how to do this, just kind of, go through it, like, you don't need to know how to do this. And that's, your husband will balance the checkbook, so don't worry.
I'm not saying that there's no woman who enjoys or is good at math, but just sort of generally speaking, we know that this is something that shows up, and most of the people working in our programs are women. So there's going to be that sort of confusion and anxiety about it.
Let's be honest, and I'm interrupting, sorry, sorry. Well, no, I'm not, but that's
Yeah,
what you
go
love
ahead.
about me,
That's why I
is the
bring you here.
catalogs. The catalogs reinforce that.
Yeah.
Right. There's a math section.
Yeah.
And it looks like computing and counting. And we forget that such a huge piece of math is that problem solving, right? That guesstimating, that what's going to happen. How come my black tower keeps falling over, but hers does not, you know, all of that. Well, all those what if questions are also math. And well, I don't even know if we forget sometimes. I think sometimes we don't even really know, you know. I mean, nobody in the world, nobody in early childhood needs any more teddy bear counters at all. Like, stop buying that stuff because you don't need it. It's not, you know, well,
you go right. Say whatever you want about those little bears.
Oh my gosh. I
mean, I've seen kids play with them, but like burying them in Play-Doh or putting them in buses and things like that. I don't see a child spontaneously choosing counting bears and little mats to count them on or things like that. And well, so the other piece of that is we can have all that math stuff on the shelves, but if we don't know why it's math, if we don't know what it means, or how then it's going to be a really sort of just it's on the shelf for the checklist.
Oh my God.
Things, but
the Eckers people come in.
Yes, exactly. So you talked about the problem solving piece. The two other things that I think that are really important, especially for infants, for math, one is just figuring out spaces, like how my body fits in space, what where I can go. That's such a foundation for math skills, is where things fit, and some things are too big or too small for the space they're in. So just letting babies explore the space is one of the biggest math foundational things you can do. But also I've been thinking about, I think I read this initially in Jared Green's book about resilience and physical play. I think it's just called I'm Okay. And he just sort of briefly refers to someone else's research, and I'm sorry I don't know their name, but I sure could find it if anyone wanted me to get more.
Right, message me
or comment. That there was some study had shown that there was a link between children engaging in risky play and being more confident about math and reading later, because you do have to be able to feel like you can take a risk to be able to work out this math problem, or to be able to answer a quizzy kind of question from your teacher. You have to have an amount of confidence that you have taken a risk before. Sometimes it goes okay, sometimes it doesn't, but you're always okay. and you try again, and maybe it works better the next time. So again, just that physical exploration and
the stick with itness, the persistence, the growth mindset, all of that.
Yeah, way more valuable for an infant than what a number looks like.
Fun.
Yes. So well,
I'm thinking of that picture in my head again too. And one, I don't like all the containers, right? So, you know, there's being in a container.
I mean, that's the wrong kind of spatial exploration.
That's the wrong kind of
stuck in the space.
Right. I'm stuck in the seat until you decide that I'm allowed to get out. Right. I surely didn't decide I wanted to sit in that bucket. And what glue? They probably, the teacher probably put some glue stick on the circle where it was
probably guided their hands to
to put it on, right?
On there,
or then undid it and then did it right, you know, afterwards, like that. But again, if you're being guided by choice and play and caring connections, you know, you reach a point where you say, you know, that's compromising. That kind of experience is compromising what I'm saying that is guiding my work. And I just think at the clearer we get on being able to state what we believe in, and then think about what that looks like, I think the more we're able to take ownership of tightening up some of our practice too.
Yeah, for sure. The other thing that struck me about the photo was that there were a couple of children, a couple of those babies, you could look at their faces and know that they did not want to be where they were. And so responsive teaching comes into play there too. Like, this is not doing it for this baby.
Right. The baby is crying as you're putting them in the bucket seat. Because, and we forget, or again, maybe not even realize, but, you start putting some of those early associations with, being sat at a table, giving paperwork essentially to do. And if that's consistently reinforced that I don't want to be here, and somebody obviously doesn't give two shits that I don't want to be here, and then we wonder why they don't want to come do anything when they're in the pre-K room, because, essentially you kind of condition them to thinking that this is not a pleasant activity.
Right.
And the only advantage you had in the infant room is that they're not mobile enough to get up and run away from you. And now they can. And so now again, we think we have a behavior problem. He's defiant and he's oppositional. Yeah. But really, he's just finally at a point of being able to say, this is nonsense, and I'm not going to tolerate it anymore. And now that my feet move and I have more agency, I'm out.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And agency, I think, is an important part of the conversation. Because
and choice and consent.
I was going to say, because that leads to a conversation about consent. If we're just picking babies up off the floor and putting them into the bucket table, and keeping them there until everybody is done. And, I'm making assumptions based on a picture. Again, I don't know whose picture it was. If you're listening and you really did respond and take them out when they cried, that's great. Wonderful. Thank you. But the snapshot of the moment that I saw, is that it shouldn't have been happening in the first place in that way. And the message we send when we do things like that, and this happens with other ages too, when we just take them physically from one place to another, especially if they're crying or communicating a lack of consent, and we do it anyway, we're again setting a pattern, and for what kind of power they have over themselves, what kind of relationship. Bigger means boss, and all those things that can be really unhealthy for future relationships, when so much of what infants are learning is about how to be in a relationship with somebody else. So we have to be aware of that too. And yes, I know there are times when a child's running into traffic and you have to bodily pick them up and move them. Well, you can save those things for the rare moments.
Right.
Different message.
And then, where my brain also started going is that when you think about, and I hate the phrase, but I'm going to use it, classroom management. So if in an infant or toddler room, if kids are kind of being containerized in order to like rotate through and change diapers, so this is like literally busy work so that I can stay on top of some of that other stuff, instead of having you explore the floor and find out what cubbyhole you fit in and which cubbyhole you do not fit in, and all of that kind of organic exploration of the space. If I'm just making my job easier by keeping you in a bucket so I can get through the transitions and the routines of the day, that's probably a whole other conversation that could stem out of that particular image that we looked at.
Yeah. Just the conversation about containers and putting babies in spaces that they can't get out of on their own. If we really are talking about and wanting to be a teacher, and I'm using that word now in this context to mean someone who supports the development of children and helps them develop skills, the physical skills are so much more important than the math drilling for an infant. That freedom that they have to move, the physical impact it can have on their body, their growth, and their fine and gross motor development to be contained more often than they're not, or too often, or for any reason other than maybe authentic safety concern.
Right.
Is the opposite of the things that you want to be as a teacher then, because that's a valid part of a child's learning and development, contributes to all that future school stuff we get so obsessed with. This, even just the ability to sit in a chair and write something can be impacted by how much physical freedom they had as an infant to develop their bodies, their muscles, their skills, their growth. So putting them in a container to do an activity that you think is educational actually might be working against all of those
100%.
goals that you've got. And we just need to be able to recognize that and talk about it. So if it is challenged, we can say, well, here's why we don't put them all in a bucket table and do the same thing at the same time. And here's, if you are concerned about math, here's what we do. Here's what we do to get them ready for math concepts, or, we just have to be able to be doing what we know is important and appropriate for the age and development of the child that's in front of us, not our image of what people expect, or our sort of persona of a teacher that we want to have for ourselves.
And I'm thinking of 3 things I want to say for listeners who might be like, oh, I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
So Angela Hanscom is kind of my go-to resource, more of a go-to. And on my website, on ooigooey.com, you can actually watch her 7-minute TED Talk on how she talks about the fact that, at some point, it's 100% acceptable to expect kids to be able to sit and pay attention to something. But in order to be able to have that eventual goal, they need to spend all these early years moving their bodies. So Angela Hanscom is a very timely resource for that. And also, I don't know what her modern work has been, but Carla Hannaford, her book that I read like way back in the early 90s.
Is she Smart Moves? Okay.
Smart Moves, Why Learning is Not All in Your Head. And she had some, and granted, it's going to be a little dated, but she had some really interesting anecdotes about even some of the children she had worked with in Hawaii who had been labeled ADD and ADHD. And literally I don't want to say all she did. I'm not undermining her work. She increased the amount of water that these children were taking and increased the amount of movement that their body had. And they're like, oh, well, look at that. They're magically not ADHD anymore. Well, imagine that. Maybe they never were in the first place. And it can be tricky sometimes to realize that some of those very quick, spontaneous decisions that we're making between birth and age 2 have the potential to super impact the rest of their life. And I also wanted to acknowledge that that sometimes people come to the infant room from other age groups and didn't get like a nice boot camp or detox or whatever you want to call it on how working with young babies is not watered down kindergarten, right? And that's a true statement for any early childhood, but especially if the only tools in your tool belt were kind of more of those teachery, and now you're with babies. There is no shame, and I'm louder for the people in the back. There is no shame to do some research so you recalibrate and have an accurate professional response. I think you're responsible to, have your finger on the pulse of what should be developmentally expected. Traditionally, I don't want to exclude or include, but I'm just saying, if you've been only working with 5s and now you're going to be with 6-month-olds, you need to read a book, right? Something and recalibrate yourself. Yeah, because it is not the same. It's not. Well, not just smaller 5-year-olds, right? Exactly, and we do. And now the we I'm speaking of is higher education, I guess, because that's what I do now. We do people a disservice in teacher prep by not including infants more intentionally. We'll talk about their physical development. We'll do some about attachment. But I don't know, as a student, the infant classes that I took were electives. They weren't required. And I took them because that was my age group, but I only knew that was my age group because I've been in the field for a long time. Like I still haven't met anybody who went to get an early childhood degree and said, because they wanted to work with infants and toddlers. Really? And I've had one interview, I think, as a director, I can remember one interview where the person specifically wanted infants or toddlers. And most of the time, and the students that I have as an instructor now, they really want that 3 to 5. They they don't want to do the infant toddler practicum because they don't think that's going to be relevant to them. But the reality is, when you go to work, if you do a childcare in your home,
you can choose more selectively. But if you're
True.
going to work in a childcare center, you're going to get assigned to the classroom that has the need, and some of them are going to end up with babies or 1-year-olds, without having been given that intentional sort of
True.
information and opportunity to talk about that age group. And so I do think that they do have that sort of responsibility to seek it out themselves. Then if they didn't get it and they're now finding themselves with that age group, I think those folks, they'll love it, but they'll love the work better. I think they'll love it more if they understand it more, and they're doing things that are appropriate for the development and the needs of that age group.
And I think we have to acknowledge like our own personal narrative and history too. Having been the oldest of 5 and the oldest of 16, cousins. And, my mom did family childcare. Honestly, I don't ever remember not having exposure to babies. So I remember actually as a young adult entering into the profession when people are like, I've never held a baby before.
Yeah.
I was like, well, how'd that happen?
Yes.
How did that happen that you've never held a baby? And I think that would come out, right? Just that a potential nervousness.
Yeah.
Because if you have not yet had that experience of knowing that, they're not going to break if you hold them, right? Yeah. You are able to, not that we're tossing them around, but you know what I'm saying, that they're not fragile the way that sometimes people stiffen up and we're worried that all of a sudden, gravity is going to get overly crazy and the babies are going to fly out of your hand. But I realized that I probably early in the career was probably a little insensitive or a little just like, what do you mean? Like what do you mean you don't know this little piggy went to market? Like, what do you mean you don't know how to make a bottle? What do you mean you've never changed a baby? And you just forget that not everybody comes to the table with that skill set, of
I definitely forget that a lot. Yeah. Because me too, I have just always been around younger children and babies. So it wasn't like that for me. And, I had a baby at 22, so I was pretty young when I had that experience. But I've definitely seen actual fear in people's faces at the prospect of being with an infant. And so then as a program leader, how hard are you going to push that? Are you going to put the person with that much fear into the infant room just because?
Right. And that's a whole other Lisa Murphy pet peeve conversation is, I cringe at the thought that somebody's just put where the need is to stay in ratio as opposed to considering their experience or their skill set or their preference, especially if somebody is at a point in their career where they're able to articulate like, hey, so this is what I know about myself. This is what I know about my style. This is the age group that I typically mesh with. At that point, if you're able to articulate that, why in the world would I put you somewhere where you've expressed that like that's going to be a little challenging and stressful? Because there's a difference between challenging because it's a little out of your comfort zone. And then there's challenging because you know that maybe you're not as understanding or you're not as tolerant or you're a control freak and you should not be in a toddler room. Right. Like, that level of self-awareness that we say we strive for people to bring it to the table and then we punish them for actually having it,
expressing it. Yes. Yeah, for sure. There's definitely some good reasons to not work with an infant if that's not your thing. But if you find yourself in an infant room, I think you should be doing whatever you can. I would hope you would have some awareness that eventually, this isn't like my preschool room or this, I can't do the same things in here that I did when I was working with 5-year-olds. So I've got to figure out what I can and should be doing.
And I think that's a reflection of the lack of, I think, and I'm being very general right now because I realize there's always places where this is the exception. But we don't onboard people, I think, appropriately to working in early childhood. Somebody left and didn't come back at lunch and I need somebody in the infant room, right? Yeah. And oh, look, you happen to be available for an interview and oh, can you start tomorrow? And you've not been able to have a 2 or 3, 4 days of watching and seeing how the vibe is here, how it works here, that you're intentionally becoming a part of an existing group and not just being thrown in the deep end. And I realized that not everybody has that luxury, but boy, man, once you get a taste of what the ideal is, it's hard to go back,
For
man.
sure.
It's
Yes.
really challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, this is 2-year-olds, not infants, but just to talk about my own experience as an early teacher in a childcare center. I loved the 2s that I had. Like the first time I got to be a lead teacher, I'd been working in the center for about a year, and then I got to be a lead teacher with my own group, and it was just me and these 2-year-olds, which was nuts. One person with, I think
18
there were
2-year-olds?
6 or 7. No,
okay.
no, not that many. But it was just me, and I had fun with them. But what I thought I was doing as the teacher was putting things on the walls and writing out my lesson plan, and that fit my personality. That was fun for me to do. But when I found the book that first introduced me to developmental domains, like I was doing this work without ever having heard the word cognitive development or and how that
for developmentally appropriate practice.
Right. So when I finally found that piece that talked me through domains and what that looks like for a 2-year-old specifically, and the kinds of things that I could have in the space or do with the children that fit their development and their needs and the priorities for that age, it changed everything. And I loved it so much more. And it became more about this group of children and less about me as a teacher playing my teacher game and doing the things that felt teachery for me. And yeah, I can't imagine having made a different decision, like presented with that information, but yeah, okay, that's cool, but I'm going to keep doing it. I'm going to keep doing it my way. I'm going to keep doing these watered down 4-year-old things that I see the 4-year-old teachers doing, and I'm going to do it with these 2s. So I don't know, it's interesting to me when people hear different information or see something and choose to just sort of completely reject it because it doesn't fit what they're already doing.
And I think that if we're honest, that decision, whether it's subconscious or not, is coming from a place of fear.
Probably, yes, sure. Yeah. It's all I guess just a different kind of fight or flight at that point. The stressors are up and we have to make a decision, and our decision is to stay where we know it's comfortable and safe. Yeah. You put a much kinder twist on that than I did.
Two emotions, fear and love.
Yeah.
Anything other than love is coming from, and I'm not taking away from your emotion chart, those of you who have one up on the wall. But I anything other than love is, if you take it down one more step, is fear. Some kind of fear is manifesting the other emotion, and that's a whole other workshop. So we don't need to get into that right now, but typically that's what it is. Fear of the unknown, fear that I might fail.
Sure. Yeah.
Fear that I'm going to upset a parent, fear that I'm going to get fired from my job, fear, it's all.
Yeah. I can't, this is terrible, but I was talking to one of the classes that I'm teaching, talking to the students, and we were talking about how the way we talk about things in class and what we've been learning in class wasn't fitting or matching what they were seeing when they went out and did their observations and things. And so they were worried about getting in trouble, when they get out there. And I was like, there's such a shortage right now. It's really hard. I mean, typically it's pretty hard to get fired in an early childhood program because of how hard it is to hire new people and find new people. But right now, especially,
right?
No one's going to fire you for trying to play more.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Or focusing on relationships instead of the calendar time.
There might be a strategy there. I mean, this might be a window of opportunity for, everybody who's a little bit of a rebel rouser. And is
right now, time to rise up.
Time to rise up. Yeah.
Oh man. And then I was like, please don't go tell anyone I said you could do what you want and not get fired. Like I had to immediately start backpedaling. But my first response was,
right,
it's
your
really
inbox
hard.
is like, I'm all those placements.
Yeah. So anyway, that's this week's story that I hope doesn't get me in trouble at work. It's a regular feature.
I was gonna say, is this a regular feature now?
Yeah. All right. So anything else you wanted to hit on when you thought about talking about the pictures that we started this conversation with?
Well, I think maybe let's toss out a couple infant toddler resources that we know are consistently
Sure.
a place to go and look if you are in that situation of like, I don't know where to go, or I don't know where the resources are. And I think at least for one of them, I think we're on the same page, but 0 to 3 is going to have some really good resources for you. And the Harvard Center on the Developing Child is going to have a lot for you, especially when it comes to the relationship component piece of it.
Yeah.
Who else?
Well, if you feel like you really need to, or you have a lesson plan form that you have to fill in math boxes or science boxes or whatever, even though you're working with infants, I don't want to say even though, but you are also working with infants. I don't know what everybody's sort of state early childhood standards are like, so I'm not going to say just refer to your own, but I can tell you that I really like Indiana's. And if you would just like Google Indiana Early Learning Foundation's PDF, you'll get them. And so for like the math section, it's divided into younger infant, older infant, younger toddler, older toddler, and it tells you what kinds of things they need practice with for their math in different areas in columns. And it's really easy to then look at those columns and say, so what do I have here already that they could get that practice?
That's helpful. So you're not planning an activity.
No, it's not a curriculum.
It's standard. It's let's look at the environment and find out how much of this organically is able to happen. And then I might have to use that to plop it into a box, depending on where you might geographically be located. Oh, that's a great resource.
Yeah.
I actually will check that out myself.
Yeah, I do like it a lot. It's very much streamlined. I don't know, because I know you've done your comparison. You for licensing in each state or whatever. The Indiana Foundations used to be like 200 pages and it was lots of repetition, and it's really streamlined now.
Thank God.
But I do really like it. I use that actually a lot with students when we're talking about content areas specifically. So combined with the relationship piece from the Developing Child website, and then maybe this is a good starting point for
not getting fired.
For not getting fired, for the actual planning that you might be required to do.
But I also will add a Lisa Murphy comment to that, which is, let's also step back and make sure that filling in boxes and lesson plans is actually a mandated requirement, and not just something that maybe you carried over with you from when you moved from pre-K into infant toddler, or infant or toddler. Because I think there's room for pushing back in, we know developmentally what is crucial in an infant room, and for my providers to be taking time making lesson plans for infants, let's actually have a conversation about that first, before we just assume it's something that we have to do. If I may be so bold.
And I think Ooey Gooey Tooey, this book I know has some good kinds of things to do with around infants and toddlers.
The Ooey Gooey handbook and Ooey Gooey Tooey I've done everything in there with 18 months and up. Everything in there is 18 months and up. Specifically for people who are working with babies. If I another plug, but those little ones infant workshop handout, which is on the website, that's going to be like, if you're working with the wee ones, that's what I want you to get your hands on, and always remembering that the goal of any infant room is for those babies to know that somebody's stupid crazy in love with them. responding to them, because I can't stress that enough. And I'm on a big kick right now too, because the year 1 of the play therapy course is wrapping up, and it's so focused on, rapprochement and Mahler and attachment and the psychological birth of the infant, and I've, like, all that stuff isn't happening, and if the environment isn't set up to where that is able to happen, you're going to be backfilling the entire time that child is with the program. And so if anybody is actually curious about anything that I just said, just send me an email and you can take the class yourself.
Yeah. I think that's a good ending point, is that without that trust and that relationship and that recognition of the baby as fully human, nothing else that we do is going to be that much of a positive impact. In fact, it could be more of a negative impact. But if we're focusing on, because we know learning happens best in a relationship, learning happens best when children can trust where they are and who they're with. And that starts with how we respond to them as babies and what kinds of things we expect from them as babies.
And what they learn from us as babies, and not learning as in how many circles are on this caterpillar, but what are they learning about being with other people?
Yep. All right, cool. Let's go find some babies to play with.
I want to go grab a baby.
Me too. I wonder if I can get a teacher into an infant room for a practicum, just so I can go hang out in a baby room.
Hey, I'm back traveling a lot now, so I get my babies on the airplane, and
nice.
People they're starting to warm up again. Like, if you be like, come here, let me hold her while you put your bags up over in the overhead.
Yeah.
Where am I going to go? I'm going to run to the back. Baby. So it's nice to see some of that trust coming back again as people are traveling again.
Yay, that's great. All right. Well, thanks, Lisa. This was a good one. I feel like I was extra grumpy, but you were great.
Yeah, not grumpy. You weren't extra grumpy.
All right. Thanks everybody for listening, and goodbye.